Yeah, hello everybody. I guess we will just wait a minute or so for people to come in. It's still increasing. So Christian, do you see the slides and everything?
Yes.
Is okay? Great.
Looks good.
That's great, yes. Yes, I guess we're gonna start and people will continue coming in. So welcome everybody to this fourth session of a webinar series where we try to wrap up what we had done before. So it has been a very inspiring sequence of inspiring inputs to what people conceive as the geography of sustainability transitions, research and concepts, and how where the major activities are currently and where they should be perhaps in the future. We missed out on one presentation, a very important one, namely on the path creation, regional path creation. But we are sure that there will be follow-ups and we can come back to this topic at a later stage. Today we will wrap up a little bit, just move beyond the individual perspectives and have sort of a broader picture and what's next for the geography of sustainability transitions. And before entering into anything, I want to remind you, that you have like two options to interact with us. So one is the chat function, where you can ask technical questions, and this will be immediately be answered by Jonas and Heiberg and Mariam Hacker. And then you have the Q&A option, where you can just post your comments or questions, which will then later be taken up in the when the Q&A will open to the panel. So the structure and the goal of the panel discussion, we have like 5 panelists today. The first one will be Christian Binz from EAG in Switzerland, then Jim Murphy from Clark University, US, Coon Franken from Utrecht University, Simona Strambach from Marburg University, and finally Lars Konan from the Moon Center in Bergen in Norway. And we agreed before to focus on 3 major issues. The first one being this goes back to a question that was asked in one of the first meetings by Robert Hassink. So what's actually the original contribution of geography of sustainability transitions? Is there anything? And what is it based on? Is it only for geographers, or what sort of literatures and disciplines and perspectives have to come in or have to be leveraged and bridged upon in order to realize these promises, if we have any promise at all? And the second bunch of questions is about the core conceptual tasks. So what do we really have to do in order to bring a geography of transitions perspective to fruition? And in particular, can we account for the heterogeneity and fragmentation of socio-technical regime and transition dynamics, as well as the global interdependencies between these processes? And just joined with that, because it's the geography of sustainability transitions and not of socio-technical transitions in general. So do we even have a clear understanding of what sustainability is, and how does this relate to other general goal formulations like development, etc.? And finally, I think that's the point we want to end with this mini series of webinar. Where are we now? Can we just assess how far we have progressed in this field? And more importantly, where should we go from here on? So this is sort of the starting point. We will first have these 5 interventions by the panelists, a very short round of wrap up, what is sort of the general message that comes out from these contributions. And then we will open up for 20 minutes Q&A, where you can just feed in your questions through the Q&A option, as I said before. So without further ado, and then Christian will conclude at the end, just providing you with some perspective on how the field, it's not concluded now, the geography of sustainability transitions, there's still a lot to say about it, and how the process is thought to continue over the next weeks and months. So with this, I would just hand over to Christian and with his take at these 3 questions.
Yes, so thanks a lot, Bernhard. So yeah, so from my perspective, I think the ultimate, value added that we can develop by further sort of creating an elaborate GeoST perspective is really that we can understand better, where deep leverage points are for transformative change in today's interconnected world. And I think that, in the past, I think geography and transition studies have somehow approached this from a quite simplistic perspective by mostly focusing into cities, regions, countries. And then assuming that key leverage points for transformation really also lie at these sort of in these sort of spatial containers in a way. And as we've seen in this webinar series, I think in many sectors there's really important leverage points also at a more international sort of scale, and also I think in sort of bundles of regions or sort of mechanisms that play in between different cities or regions that push in the same direction. And I think understanding this, creating a real sort of elaborate multi-scalar perspective will really be important to have also more relevant, I think, advice for activists and policymakers and so on, people that want to push transitions in certain directions. So this means if you want to achieve that, I think we still need to really creatively combine ideas from transition studies, human economic geography, organization studies, and of course also globalization literature in different disciplines. And I think what's at the core really here in terms of conceptual development is that we have to unpack, what's the relation between these sort of potentially global sector structures and then the more place-based, local, regional, institutional arrangements that evolve over long periods of time in given places and regions. And to look at this from 2 sides of the coins. On one hand side, you could ask, okay, so how does the transformation of a certain sector structure influence different regions in different ways? And on the other hand, how does sort of a transformation in one region then impact, a sort of a broader transition of a whole sector? And which are the regions which have this influence, which do not, and why? And these kind of questions are really key, I guess. So this also means that we should probably move beyond the simple niche regime dichotomy, which we've sort of inherited from transition studies, and use these approaches that also Simone and Gesa have really nicely elaborated in one of the sessions, like, competing social technical configuration and field logics in sort of transforming sectors and regions. And, talking about the issue about development or sustainability, I think we should absolutely move beyond this narrow understanding of development, which is focusing very much on green innovation in high-tech sectors like electric cars and PV panels and so on. But at the same time, I also think that this is not a debate we have to resolve in the GeoST community alone. So I think this talks to a much broader debate, which has to happen at the level of transition studies, geography, and also its interconnections with many disciplines in sustainability science. And I'm thinking about, recent debates about these interactions of social ecological and social technical systems, or resilience versus transformation, perspectives, and so on. So overall, I think I'm pretty positive in a sense that we're still an emergent, I guess, and very heterogeneous field of research. But I'm positive that in the mid to long term, this can turn into a sort of its own sort of small field of research, also, which is sort of a new paradigm in innovation studies more broadly, or, the social sciences more broadly, create its own sort of soul, I would say. So that's my hope. And I think to get there, first of all, we need more sort of development of boundary objects, sort of things we can all sort of relate to and say, okay, this is what GeoST really stands for. And I think this can be so mobilizing research questions, but also certain conceptual approaches, emblematic empirical cases, or even new methods that we could develop. And then, of course, continuous community building. And I think that's what we try to do with this webinar and all the follow-up activities that could develop from this. And especially, identifying sort of different streams of theorizing, and then, understanding better, how we could most productively and strategically cross-fertilize between geography and transition studies and still keep this sort of identity as a geography of transition sort of community. So that's my 5 cents.
Thanks a lot, Christian. So that you were perfect in time, 4 minutes, really. So I tried to move on to Jim Murphy.
Great, thanks, Bernhard. This has been a real pleasure to participate in this, and it's great to see so many people from all over the world here today. Yeah, so I'll just go on with the format that Christian did, and working off of Bernhard's call, his questions. So first of all, I think what the GeoST perspective can do is very significant if we can kind of develop the frameworks and concepts to do it. And that is to enable a rigorous and comparative research program that really looks at the geographical unevenness of transitions and unpacks their multi-scalar and place-specific factors and processes and the outcomes associated with those. So to really get at sort of when transitions work better or worse and why. And in this regard, I think there's a lot of space for really productive engagements around development studies, work in comparative urbanisms, some work on variegated capitalisms, which is coming out of sort of a substantivist economic geography. And then I think there's some interesting potential tie-ins to marketization studies as well that I think could be really promising. Conceptually, I think we definitely, for particularly those of us who work in places like sub-Saharan Africa and in the developing world, need to move beyond monolithic, uniform socio-technical regimes. We need to better capture, analyze, and compare multiscolarities and the internal differentiations, fragmentations, and mis or non-alignments that are associated with regimes. And I think a way to do this is to do more grounded research, really looking at build concepts and theories through the studies of the kind of everyday worlds of providers, users, innovators, and the like. And I think there's a lot of space to do that. I think we need to better link sectoral regimes and transitions to wider political, economic, and socioeconomic processes and features. Perhaps you could call that the landscape, as it were, but I think we need to fine tune that a lot more. I think there's a lot of good work that can be done there. And then just reiterating, what about development and sustainability? What do we mean? What are we talking about? Should they be understood as being the same everywhere? And is economic growth compatible with or necessary for transitions? I think this is kind of an interesting elephant in the room about sustainability transitions as we think about them. And then how do we link substantively these transition dynamics to these kinds of outcomes? And how can we measure these? And thinking about measurements of this stuff. In terms of progress and future directions, I think this has been a really wonderful journey for me personally, and I think for many of the panelists here to be part of this community, this evolving community. I think it's a really healthy community. It's an open community. It's inclusive and expanding. We've built really successful bridges, obviously, to STRN and then to evolutionary economic geography and regional studies. So I think in that sense, we've got some good established bridges. Bridges that need some work, I would say, are human geography more generally. I think urban geography and sort of some of the infrastructure studies in human geography. And I think development studies as well. We need to continue to work on those bridges. And part of that really relates to doing more work in the global South, in terms of our geographies of research. And then there's this interesting question for me, and this really is a North American perspective that you're seeing in this last line about bridges that may be challenging. Political ecology and Marxian political economy in particular, I think are two areas that there's a lot of work that really does overlap in some interesting ways with what transition scholars are doing. But I'm not so sure, at least in the North American context, that people are really open to engaging in a productive, dialogue. I think I see this framing of transitions as being kind of, systematic, and it's techno-deterministic, or it's not centering capital with a capital C. And I think, so this is a particular North American challenge that, and you can just see by the participation in the panel and even in the participants and the attendees, that there's this particular North American challenge here. So I'll stop there and I'll hand it off to the next person. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jim. Very concise as always. So maybe move to the next one, to Coon Franken. You're muted, Coen.
Thank you, Bernhard, and thanks for the invitation. I'll just go through the 3 points. And to me, the main contributions of GeoST has been to make the transitions community aware that geography matters in many different ways, But at the same time, it also introduced to geographers the field of transition. So I think it's a classic case of an interface field. And for me, on a personal note, I like GeoST a lot because it has enriched, in my view, evolutionary economic geography a lot, where we have always focused on the supply side conditions, while GeoST also highlights the role of users and institutions. And we tried to bring these two fields together in a paper. Now, for me also, I think the main takeaway is that not just regimes, but also niches and landscapes are all spatially differentiated, which leads to unique local configurations that provide these leverage points of Christian or windows of locational opportunity as geographers maybe would have it. But I also value people who just zoom in on one single city or region, because then you can nicely highlight the nexus between all those different social technical systems, as well as this splintering in different type of regimes within the same sector. So I think both are equally valid to do. Now, I have two questions that came to my mind about the future. So first of all, even though, for example, Christian emphasizes the leverage points, I haven't seen many examples of true policy engagement between this GeoST literature and the policy world. For example, in Europe, we have a lot of emphasis and money going into regional policy. And they are now also trying to include societal challenges, so we can have real impact on the policy process and contents there. But my main hope for GeoST is that it becomes a much bigger platform than it currently is. I think now it mainly functions as a platform to connect economic geographers and sustainability transitions researchers, and to some extent also institutional sociologists and development scholars. And that's, of course, where I think the main spillovers are to be expected. But I also think we need to look out for more inspiration and look what other people have already been doing, just to avoid reinventing the wheel, and leverage what other people have done. So on the one hand, I think we can learn from evolutionary and institutional theory much more to improve theorizing, because I think it's now time to try to really go beyond just frameworks and start more in-depth theorizing. But I also think we can learn much more from, for example, development studies, and that would allow us to move away from the Northern Eurocentric origins of many of the works in transition studies. And obviously this panel today still reflects those origins, but I think GeoST has really the potential to become this global platform. And for me personally, I would love to see many more people reading into the work of historians and sociologists, political scientists, who have looked at transitions before, but maybe not just sustainability transitions, but also other transitions. But even if you would want to limit yourself to sustainability transitions, I think we should not forget that we have solved a lot of sustainability challenges in the past related to pollution or public health, hygiene, etc. And there's a lot to learn from all those past transitions to reflect on the current day contexts.
Yes, thanks a lot. Thanks. Oh, shit. Sorry. Sorry, I have some challenges, technical challenges. Suddenly, my screen went off, etc. May I just hand over to Simone I will just try to set up my screen sharing.
Shall I step in, Bernhard, and share mine, and then you?
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Okay. Oh yeah.
You see it?
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah.
Okay, Simone, the floor is yours. Sorry.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. Sorry, I'm a bit late because I'm coming from meetings. Yeah, I think important points are already raised, but I would like to say some words, perhaps add on points. On the one hand, I think also that the really value added of the geography of sustainable transition is the awareness of this multiplicity of transition paths. And in the newer years, especially also the multiscalarity of the spatial shaping of transition processes. And there was also a question, how could we internally combine different disciplinary fields to better understand the mechanisms underlying the spatial shaping? Because we know a lot about context specificity, but what are the real spatial mechanisms that are important for transition? And here I see also a difference between economic and human geography. They're producing also deeper insights into transformation and development processes, which are not normative oriented as oriented on sustainability, but even this kind of mechanisms are really useful to transfer it to sustainability transformation processes. So here I see, for example, also the geography of innovation coming up with different forms of proximities and showing that knowledge is not cannot be randomly combined, and we have also the knowledge dynamics approach in younger years. They have brought out that especially symbolic knowledge on social systems, norms, and culture play an important role. And this is more and more the case when we are thinking on sustainability, because sustainability, I will come later on, so in the understanding is a process, and the research on it showed that it's highly context specific and related to wicked problems, and that we have really a complex knowledge production and co-creation processes in transformation. And here also I think that we have a lot of inspiring concepts from neo-institutional theory and also from developing global studies. But what I see as a real challenge is to produce deeper insights in the interconnection of institutional dynamics on different scales. They're across scale dynamics. And from my point of view, it is also here important to look more on institutional configurations that are place-based, that are really developed over time, and how microdynamics use these place-based configurations to transform and to adapt to more sustainable transition, on more sustainable, to more institutions that promote sustainability. What I miss a little bit in the geography of sustainability transition in the last years is the point that social and sustainability innovation research find not a lot of entrance in it, but we see that it is not the technology often is not enough to really solve wicked problems or move away from unsustainable practices. It's often the social and the sustainability part that means the change of social practices. And here we, in this research, that has the focus on the social dimension. And from this also technology plays a huge role. We can see that this kind of innovations have different characteristics. They emerge in multi-actor environments. Firms are only one actor group. They involve civil society, and these different actor groups, NGOs, and so far, they bargaining about what is really this normative concept of sustainability in their context. So from an analytical point of view, I think to learn more about this dynamics and to integrate it more would be and really value add and a direction to go to, in my perspective, and also to improving theory building, which is often transnational. Improving theory building on these process dynamics, also on process ontologies, and how more short-time changes are stabilized and leading later on to more transformative change. But we know a lot of how to introduce niches, but we see that the real transformative change do not take place often as supposed. And here, I think, is a conceptual task to develop methodologies for comparative research, because they foster then and support theory building. And coming to the last point, I think for the future direction, in my perspective, we should have more such initiatives as we have here in the web series for creating organizational forms as enablers and drivers for theory building, and for open up the unexplored potential that this heterogeneous community has. And I see what is really important is building shared understanding. What are key research questions, key research gaps and perspectives? And there we need communication. And also, as Christian raised, identifying boundary objects that facilitate this transdisciplinary knowledge combination and creation. Thank you.
Thanks, Simone. So we're left with the last contributor, that's Lars Konan.
Thanks, Bernhard, and thanks to all the previous speakers. It's hard to sort of say something substantive perhaps now, but I'll give it a shot. So to me, the geography of sustainability transitions brings together what my colleague Kevin Morgan calls two turns in innovation studies, a spatial turn and a normative turn. It's now generally accepted that transitions do not unfold anywhere. They are spatially uneven due to territorially variegated institutions, capabilities, resources, and networks. At the same time, the geography of innovation and the work of economic geographers is taking the directionality of innovation much more serious than in the past. It's much more looking at the dark side of innovation. It's looking at issues like contestation, resistance, as inherent aspects of change and innovation and transformation. I think the contribution of GeoST to transition studies can be distinguished along three lines. Topical concern, as has been sort of emphasized in the SDRN agenda, focusing, for example, on urban sustainability transitions and smart cities. Theoretical engagement, and notably the happy engagement between transition studies and evolutionary economic geography. And thirdly, which has not really been mentioned that much, and Koen also brought it up now, is policy commitment. And just like innovation studies, sustainability transitions derives much of its legitimacy from the relevance and value add for policy making. And this goes back all the way to the sort of the Dutch origins of transitions research and its intimate relationship to Dutch transition policy. And I think an important value add of the geography of sustainability transitions has been its decentering of what was often an implicit national perspective on governance and policy aspects in sustainability transitions. What in my understanding, the geography of sustainability transitions has achieved conceptually is to help contextualize conditions and processes contingent on place-based factors and situated in the multiscalar space. Still, many transition scholars sometimes shrug and ask, so what? This is perhaps because such contextualization was mainly done by extending existing transition theory frameworks rather than suggesting something new. And here there's perhaps greater novelty and diversity and heterogeneity in the work on urban sustainability transitions, even though I personally sometimes struggle a bit with the woolly conceptual terminology in this literature. Now, to return again to the theme of governance, it's clear that GeoST has opened up the ways in which transition processes are governed in different places. Still, ideas derived from transition management and strategic niche management remain dominant designs in the governance of sustainability transitions in and across cities, regions, and countries. While strong on the spatial underpinnings of sustainability transitions, I believe GeoST has remained a bit weaker with regard to the impacts of sustainability transitions beyond the emergence, growth, and reconfiguration of industries. There's relatively little attention for the sustainability aspect, as has already been pointed out, and notably for the fact that the territorial distribution of the positive and negative impacts of sustainability transitions may be highly differentiated. And this brings me to the final aspect here, the what next question. So this uneven spatial distribution of transitions has been mainly treated so far as a matter of fact, I think. It seems, however, that it should also be treated as a matter of concern. As sustainability transitions increasingly accelerate and transform economies and societies on various levels, we also have to acknowledge that they produce winners and losers. And overlooking the fate and the role of those regions, communities, and industries that may end up at the losing end of sustainability transitions could create considerable tensions with regard to social cohesion and political legitimacy. And this is already evident in the rise of populist movements that explicitly oppose changes and transformations implied by sustainability transitions. And as the work of fellow geographer Andres Rodriguez Post shows, this geography of discontent is not coincidental. And that raises the importance of what is coined just transitions and how transitions are governed in ways that are democratically inclusive and are mindful to the social costs of transitions, not just the benefits. It's therefore promising to indeed witness that transition think is increasingly picked up by mainstream territorial policy, notably in smart specialization. And not only will this mobilize massive resources and political legitimacy for transitions, it will also offer an exciting research opportunity to engage with the spatially differentiated ways in which transition policy is implemented, not just designed, in different regions and countries across Europe. Finally, related to the contemporary mainstreaming of sustainability transitions and the need to engage with the social, environmental, economic impacts, I think more research is needed on the ways in which transitions unfold in ordinary regions and mundane sectors. GeoST has been largely preoccupied with industry, technology, and institutional dynamics geared to generating competitive advantage and partly relying then on trickle-down effects, how local and regional economies benefit from green industrial transformation. This rationale for economic restructuring may not hold for all regions and sectors and raises questions how sustainability transitions shape regional development beyond a narrow economic conceptualization and green industry core and relates to the overall well-being of citizens. Thanks a lot. That's it.
Yeah, thanks, Lars, for this last contribution. So I would now proceed to a first reaction by the panel on whether you see sort of major lines popping up that you would just reinforce. or sort of divergence or trade-offs that we have to confront before we open up to the plenary. And if I may just start with a very superficial observation, I have been known to overstretch the metaphor of the dead horse, So you should know when you're sitting on a dead horse and get off it, because it will not bring you anywhere anymore. And in my view, all the panelists are still quite enthusiastic about the field and see that's not a dead horse at all, it's still young and lively, but there are some development challenges, And so at least otherwise we could stop it here, but it's still a lively enough field to invest into it. So any of the panelists, do you have a sort of a point that struck you especially? Then just unmute your phone and bring it in.
I could jump in, Bernhard, real quick. I really appreciated Christian and Simona's points about boundary objects. I think that's a really interesting way to think about the kind of trading zones that GeoST can expand and develop. And I was thinking about what those might be, right? So markets, institutions, variegated capitalisms, like different forms of capitalism, governance, those kinds of things. I think that's a really productive way to kind of think about that. And it also gets me to think about this issue about whether or not we are net importers or exporters. And I think the terms of trade are definitely negative for us. I think we're importing a lot and we're bringing a lot because we're an open, inclusive community that's really interested in pushing boundaries. I don't know if we're really getting outside that as effectively as we could. And I think that's why the boundary object idea is so interesting and important.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jim. And perhaps related to that, one thing that I observed is sort of call for boundary spanning, in how many directions can we go? And Coen made a strong point of saying, well, there's so much still out there, that we should, import in a certain way. And you, Jim, just more focused on what are the trade-offs, and how much can you really integrate? And, or put in another way, when do you start from importing to exporting? And how large can the stretch be? I guess this is a very important question that's still not resolved and needs further attention. Yeah, Christian.
Yeah, I think the interface with evolutionary economic geography and especially also the industrial path development sort of forks, I think that's a nice example where I think both sides profited from the exchange. And I guess this could be sort of a role model, how this could work with other sort of communities. And yeah, maybe also coming back to the point by Koen about zooming into specific regions and looking into sort of bundles of regimes versus zooming out and looking into multi-scalar interactions. I really think that this can also be approached from different theoretical perspectives. Maybe I think we've also seen this in the webinar now that, with Jim's and Simone's sort of approach, which sort of differ from what Bernhard presented. I think that's totally legitimate too. So it's not like we have to create one unifying big theory, which then can be exported to other fields, but rather, this could be more granular. I think this as a vision to go forward, this would be more productive, I guess.
Yes.
Perhaps taking up this, if I may,
Sure.
this last point from Christian, I think also that we have black boxes. Every approach has a certain perspective, and the region as a nexus for inter-regime shaping is an important point. On the other hand, also the global forces, they shape and are shaped by regional dynamics. And I think going in such a kind of dialogue more deeply, and also from a methodological point, how can we grasp these dynamics with new methods and engage with such kind of perspectives, I think could be very creative and insightful in my perspective.
Thank you, Simona. So Lars?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up also on the point that was raised by Jim about bridges too far, and that sort of relates to also the point about what could be suitable boundary objects, because I had a sort of a similar experience, not in North America, but in another Anglo-Saxon country, Australia, with quite a lot of pushback from human and economic geographers on sort of sustainability transitions. And I think partly that, an explanation for that could be sort of the roots of sort of ecological modernization that are quite strong in sustainability transitions. and that sort of maybe then also, gives us some guidance about, where we could look for, potentially fruitful boundary objects. And at the same time recognizing that there are some sort of maybe deeper ontological barriers to further engagement. And I think in that sense, taking a parallel with urban sustainability transition research, which is, in my sort of understanding, much more diverse, but at the same time less grounded. So I think they run the risk sometimes of becoming this sort of hollow donut model, where there's a lot of sort of interesting sort of conceptual terminology happening, but where it's difficult to sort of communicate across different turfs and across different fields.
Yeah, thanks, Lars. So last word is to Koen. Huh?
Yes, if I can add with the example of institutional sociology, I think that is an example where just importing insights and theories has worked very well without actually having to engage with them, because that is quite hard, because they have their own communities and institutions. So I don't think you necessarily need to engage with other communities to still profit from them. Same if we talk about methodologies, and we can learn a lot from other disciplines that have much longer looked, for example, at processes over time, or mapping certain dynamics. So yeah, I'm very much in favor of opening even more doors.
Yeah, great. So we see a little bit of stretch of a variety of positions to take. So I would perhaps move on now to the Q&A, the questions that came in. And so one by Guillaume Lessard was explicitly addressing this sort of Anglo-Saxon culture conundrum. And he writes, I strongly agree with Murphy in regards to the role of GeoST. We need to play in the North American sustainability urban transitions. I found it is especially useful to show that considering transition policies in a multi-level cross-scale perspective shows that existing technocentric, for instance, supportive electric car and sustainable housing policies are not able to tackle the elephant in the room in North America, which is urban sprawl development patterns and car single-family home culture, thus uneven development and socioeconomic polarization patterns. Would you like to comment on these issues? So is there anything culturally or let's say geographically that prevents North America to go through transitions deeply?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert necessarily on my own context per se in terms of the details of some of this. I do think the technocentrism, and that's hardly unique to North America. I think people fetishize technologies and the possibilities of technologies in most places. What I would say, what's interesting about your question is very quickly, it relates in many ways to the reluctance of many North American critical human environment geographers to take up transitions or even sustainability. And sustainability, there's a kind of culture about sustainability as being kind of a captured concept, captured by the World Bank. It's been captured by the mainstream political institutions, and therefore it's kind of unable to really deal with those polarization and uneven development. So there's other theories and ontologies that are turned to address those pressing questions that you're getting at. So I think that's all I would say about it. I think you're right, and it goes back to Lars's point of talking about Andres's work about the revenge of the places that don't matter. The resistance of people to change is also partly about this polarization, the socioeconomic polarization. That's very, very significant.
Lars, would you want to add on this? Or?
Yeah, partly that, I mean, there is an interesting challenge to a governance challenge for sustainability transitions, given that the dominant governance models have been developed in a political economy sphere, which much less sort of had to deal with those sort of polarizations. So, typically, I think, both strategic niche management and transition management comes from a sort of Dutch polder model, which sort of very much subscribes to democratic deliberation, but also which is conditioned by the fact that these are sort of, societies which are sort of not dealing with the degree of polarization as you see in places like the US or in Australia. So I think for geographers, there's really a challenge there to also think about, new governance models for transitions that go beyond sort of these more, corporatist, deliberative democracy kind of inspired models. And in that sense, I'm kind of very interested to see what is going to happen now that smart specialization increasingly is sort of internalizing ideas around sustainability transitions, and then to see how that sort of is going to be implemented very differently in different regions across Europe.
Well, thanks a lot. I guess we move to the next one. Christian, could you please stop sharing the presentation? Thanks a lot.
Yes, sure.
I guess I have another one, and then I will go to the first ones by Nuno Bento about, can Global South take the lessons from the previous energy transition studies of the Global North? And how well previous energy transition studies, also at GeoST, can be used to study socio-economic transformations? So who would want to respond to that one? Is there anything, based on what we have just discussed, so how translatable are the insights that we gained in transition studies to other parts of the world, for instance, the Global South? Jim, I guess that's one of your questions.
Yeah, I'll just very quickly. I think we have to be very cautious about that. I mean, that's the whole developmentalist problem about sort of like the Rostovian teleology and things like that. Obviously, we have to pay attention to those transitions and processes and have concepts that come out of those and see how those map onto dynamics playing out in the Global South. But I think we need to be very careful. And that's why I'm calling for more of a grounded research, because I think sometimes we start in with the concepts and the variables that have been, gleaned from work that's gone on in, say, continental Europe. And then it kind of blinds us from seeing the complexities or the different kinds of entanglements and heterogeneities that play out in cities like Nairobi. So I think so I think there, obviously we can't ignore those experiences, but I think we have to be very careful about how we go about mapping them and be very reflexive and self-critical about where they're not able to really account for change in dynamics.
Anyone wants to add to that?
Yeah, I think also the work by Bernhard and others, I think, has really nicely shown that going into these new sort of contexts or non-traditional contexts actually helps to also improve the theory making quite substantively. So it's like a discovery context where you can question your taken for granted sort of conceptual and theoretical beliefs and sort of develop new important sort of concepts. And I think in that sense, GeoST could also at the meta level be sort of keep this up, I think, and actually do this very consciously and not just like as a side activity.
Yes, no, I fully agree with that. Perhaps we can move on to the next one. I have one by Mark Dyke. Very interesting question. I have a question for discussion around the definition of transition in geography of sustainability transitions. In many presentations, it seemed to be operationalized synonymous to change, although bringing in niche regime labels. And in case studies, it's hard to see how less fundamental change are distinguished from more fundamental change. When is a particular change labeled as transition? For instance, in urban changes, urban transitions. So that's sort of a basic transitions question. Who would feel comfortable addressing that? There's a long debate about transformations and transitions and how to distinguish the two. And there's a lot of labeling going on in our field. I fully agree with that.
Well, if I may
yeah, sure.
add to this, I think in transitions is a problematic concept, of course, and it has its roots in economics. But I now tend to think much more in terms of societal challenges, where you have ways to assess whether particular challenges are being addressed and solved more or less in a satisfactory manner. For example, child poverty or obesity or CO2 emissions, etc. And that and if you take that as a kind of normative endpoints that are also politically decided, then for me it doesn't really matter if those objectives are met through transitions or in other ways, for example, in changing regulation or consumer practices. And then you don't necessarily need the whole concept anymore to still study how, as a society, you try to improve the well-being of lives.
Yeah, I guess I have a very nice follow-up question to that by Emil Evenhuis. He says, with regard to what does geography of sustainability transitions bring to the policy table, I guess there would be an important role for scenario analysis in showing to policymakers where transitions may go, what policies would then be needed, and what are key contextual variables. An important issue in this respect is also how geography of sustainability transition can enable democratic decision-making rather than a technocratic vision on transitions and what policymakers should do. I think that's a very good question. So, you know, is its implicitly, has it always been ultimately technocratic, despite all the starting points of being very critical about technocratic views on societal development? What about technocracy? And how to put it into sort of more democratic decision-making processes? I guess that's the proposal. Yeah, Lars.
Yeah, I think, I mean, Emil calls it here scenario analysis. I think what is also a common term in transition studies would be experimentation, and to really sort of also understand innovation processes as being open-ended and sort of engaging with fundamental uncertainties. And I think in that sense, again, it could be, you know, if you think about smart specialization and how that emphasizes, you know, entrepreneurial discovery processes, what transition sort of could bring to that policy table is, you know, rather than seeing it as entrepreneurial discovery, seeing it as entrepreneurial experimentation. And to see innovation processes then not just as sort of, you know, simple exploration, exploitation of knowledge, but really also, you know, involving processes of, you know, resistance and contestation and, you know, disclosing particular interests and norms and values. So I think that, you know, there is a lot that, again, you know, how that then has to be contextualized is of course another question. But at the same time, you know, with here we should probably also then acknowledge the heterogeneity in transition research, where you know, certain parts are probably indeed less technocratic. I think I want to sort of make that qualification as well, that we don't sort of, you know, position all transition research as being necessarily, you know, overly technocratic.
Yeah, but there's an interesting tension since the beginning, you know, between what was claimed and how it was applied, and often, etc. So I guess that's interesting. But I can just follow with another question by Ingeborg Nistroy. Or Simona, you want? Sorry.
Can I just add a point? I think on the one hand, when we are talking about policy, that is also the case that a policymaker does not want to have easy solutions. Or scenario building could be one. The other hand could be to give space for the reflection for the processes and to identify, for example, developing methods, to identify actors, to identify communities, and to put them together related to certain problematics. For example, I would like to raise the point, transition depends on sustainability innovation. And we have also a lot of instruments at the moment by big data or, for example, with social media to tackle or to mobilize resources. When you're thinking, for example, in Germany, we had sustainability innovation really induced by the government, a hackathon on we versus virus. And in this short-time hackathon, 1,200 projects pop up from people. And there was a huge initiative to select this to 150. And they are going on and solving really socio-ecological problems around the COVID problematic. And this shows so that in transition research, we have also other possibilities really to put things on the floor to foster transformation.
Okay, thank you. Well, perhaps just along the lines of your response, I have perhaps a last question that I can mention is from Harm van den Heiligenberg. The analysis of geographical unevenness in transition not at all finished, in my view. We are in the need of quantitative research with large databases to better explain these uneven patterns that enabling context conditions, such as already executed in economic geography for several years. So perhaps if we could just have one or two positions on more on the methodological approach. Is there really a revolution in transition studies out there, becoming much more mainstream in a sense with quantitative data, large data sets, etc.? Or will we be caught in the old divide of the quantitative and qualitative research traditions? Who want to elaborate on that? Christian, want to say something?
Yeah, obviously, I mean, so ideas like this social technical network analysis or discourse network analysis, which also is used heavily in organization studies, would be something where you can actually tackle global databases, media sort of repositories, and then, you know, analyze what actors stand for what in these public discourses and what does that mean in terms of, you know, pushing or hindering transition in certain places or not. I think that's something that's certainly useful. I guess from evolution economic geography, there's quite some inspiration that could be taken too. And yeah, I think also this could be then translated also ultimately into sort of, you know, policy scenarios, which also are able to assess, okay, what would be the effects of a policy, not just inside the given city, region, or country, but what are potential spillover effects to other places, which you have to take into account ex ante. And this could be highly interesting and something we can contribute, which I think no other literature could contribute to date. So quite promising too.
May I just ask Koen, you know, you're perhaps the one who is most versatile in terms of methodological approaches. How you see this?
I think on the one hand, the data and methods have improved so much that we can characterize very specific conditions in each region, and from that indeed indicate spillover opportunities. But at the same time, I think yeah, any kind of quantitative analysis on that scale only produces statistical information, and in the end, action needs to be taken on the ground, and it needs to have support on the ground. So I would also warn for a data-driven policy process. Because I don't think even those type of analysis will necessarily give the guidance that we need, and also not everyone will buy into those analyses. So next to that, there are also these more policy processes based on imaginaries and on trying to leverage the motivations and energies and time budgets of many people on the ground to actually do the change. And and I do believe the two type of ways of thinking and empirical methodologies are now converging, and I see many more people doing both to study one particular phenomenon.
Okay. Simone, because we have slowly come to a close, if perhaps the last contributions, could be.
Yeah, I just would like to take up this point, and we haven't really spoken about the interaction between the virtual spaces and physical spaces, and a lot of dynamics emerge through social media. And social media is really a resource pool to look on becoming new dynamics to analyze institutions in the becoming, because in the social media is an enabler and driver to build up connections transnationally, transregionally to certain problematics. And I think this is really a new development that we could also use in quantitative and qualitative ways.
Thanks a lot, Simone. This was a perfect final word, because the ending with the dead horse metaphor, it looks like there's still a lot of opportunities out there, in conceptual terms and reaching out to different disciplines, in empirical terms, what sort of phenomena to address. And last but not least, also in terms of methodological approaches, which is really sort of opening up and enabling lots of new views. And so I would conclude and say, well, it's a lively field. A lot needs to be done. It's not finished and canonized yet by any means. And we hopefully, all of you out there, you will start to contribute or have already contributed to this field, and it will continue for some time. With this, I would just hand over to Christian to conclude the series and also introduce us to some ideas on how it could proceed from here. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks a lot to all of you. So it's sad to reach the end of this webinar, which I think was really inspiring and stimulating. So now the question is, of course, okay, what's the concrete next step we can do in the sort of short-term future? And actually, there's a few, things already lined up. Several of you approached us and had ideas, and a few things were already in the pipeline from our side. So here's a short overview of what's going to happen next year. So first of all, we will establish this SRN thematic group. So this should happen by the end of this year, early next year. So we will set up a website on the SRN website too, and create a mailing list. And the sort of social media profile, Miriam has already worked on that. We can probably build on this quite a lot. So this should be available early next year, and will be sort of a meeting place. We can also exchange information through the mailing list and so on. Then we will organize, or we would like to organize an online follow-up webinar, because next spring is probably still going to be hard to organize sort of real-world conferences. So we thought it would be nice to have such a follow-up event, and we have already ideas for how this could be structured. And Toon Melen has actually also raised interest in organizing such a follow-up event. So this could happen next year. So stay tuned for that. And then, of course, we want to organize special session tracks at the next year's IST and conference, and maybe the global conference on economic geography. But that, of course, depends on how COVID is treating us until then. But certainly, that's not clear who's going to organize that, but probably we can have some more focused sort of special sessions than in these international events. We're exploring opportunities to set up a working paper series, which might also be a nice sort of feature of such a community. And there's an opportunity which Johan Mjörner is exploring currently, and we will keep you posted on this for sure. And then there's, of course, we can draft joint papers and special issues, that's always possible. So there's, I think, at least 2 special issues in the pipeline already, one on scales and transitions, one on, I think, sort of the geography of transition in energy transitions, and probably more. I'm not sure if I'm aware of everything here, but there's some interesting initiatives already on the way. And then finally, of course, there's scope to create all sort of workshops, meetings, and interactions also with the other SRN thematic groups, which we will explore. So anyways, so if you have any inputs, ideas, get in touch with us at any times. This is for the time being the place where you can reach us. So the Geography of Transitions website will be kept online for a few months at least until we have another solution. And yes, you can also contact me or also use our social media hashtag. And yeah, this is also the point then to thank everybody on the organization team, all the panelists and discussants, all of you for all your inputs and questions. And yeah, I would also really like to thank Miriam Hacker and Jonas Heiberg again for the great support in setting this up. Thanks a lot for that. This was really nice and smooth. And yeah, I hope to see you soon again, online or wherever next meetings might happen. Yes, and please keep it up and join us for the next activities. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.